Hey, everybody. Joining me here today from In Goal Magazine and NHL.com, Kevin Woodley. Thank you so much for being here, my man. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Yourself?
I'm doing very good. Happy New Year, my man. How was
Yeah.
your holidays and all that?
My holidays were fantastic. Better than yours, I think, because it sounds like you spent them sick. I spent them surfing in Hawaii. I am a very good son-in-law. My mother-in-law spends a couple months a year down there, and I make sure we take the kids down because that's how unselfish I am.
You are. That's just a nice service that you're providing there for your mother-in-law. Hawaii is a really nice trip, man. I haven't been there in a little while, but are you a big like scuba snorkeling guy? Do you do that kind of thing?
Can't scuba because I punctured a lung racing mountain bikes in my youth, and once you've done that, they don't advise. My wife and daughter scuba and saw. I was very jealous. They saw some stingrays, they saw some sharks, and I just snorkel. So I just hang out with like the sea turtles while they go deep and find the really cool stuff.
That is nice, but I don't know, man. I don't like the idea of sharing water with these massive animals. Like it's amazing. I went out there. I was snorkeling last time I was in Hawaii, and I wasn't prepared. We're like, wow, look at these beautiful coral. Like, oh, this is so many colors down here. And then this massive sea turtle is just, like right beside me, floating by, and that gave me a jolt. I was like, you know what? I'm good, man. That like if that guy decides to just break bad, like I'm in trouble.
Yeah, no, the turtles, you got nothing to worry about.
Okay,
But
all
I've
right.
been in the water when a sea turtle came in that had been clipped by a propeller, and
Oh,
so it was bleeding. And the next thing you know, there was a 12-foot tiger absolutely hammering the sea turtle, and we were all being ushered out of the water, and it was a little freaky. The reality, though, is if you don't like swimming with big creatures, don't swim in Hawaii, because as the lifeguards that were clearing the bay told me that day, they are always there. We went cage diving with sharks last year in Hawaii, and I'm fascinated by it. I could spend all day in the water. I love it.
Oh, dang. Did you do that this time out? Did you go cage diving again?
No, not this time. Not this time.
Okay.
That's a once in a lifetime. That's a sort of bucket list thing. Try it out. Unfortunately, it just fed my daughter's desire to actually be in the water with sharks without a cage. So, which she did this year. So,
Oh, dear
yeah,
God.
little. I'm almost glad I can't scuba. So send the wife out for those death trips.
Yeah, there you go. You just hang out in the hotel room. You watch some hockey. That sounds like a good time. All right, buddy. We got to get the biz here. I really appreciate you coming on the show here again, Kevin. We got a Canucks game here on tap tonight against the Jets. And I wanted to do a little bit of Canucks talk before we jump in on some goalies. And I wanted to get your thoughts just about this current iteration of this Canucks team and sort of their identity. With what I think they've sort of been trending with what many describe as like low event hockey, right? We've seen the low shot totals, the low high danger chances for, and also, it's been well documented that it's basically two different teams, like the team with Quinn Hughes on the ice and the team without Quinn Hughes on the ice. And I wanted to just ask you what you're seeing out there. And sir, what are your thoughts on this team?
Well, I think you summed it up quite nicely. Their identity last year, the one that allowed them to have success, the one that made them tough out in the Stanley Cup playoffs and got them through a round, was defensive hockey. It's what allowed them to absorb the loss of Thatcher Demko in the playoffs and get to the second round, into Game 7 of the second round with Artur Shilovs in net. Their ability to cut down on high danger chances against, like it's somewhat predictive, your ability to limit high danger 5-on-5 chances against, and it waned this year.
Yeah.
So on top of personnel changes, and I think actually in part because of some of the personnel changes, and that's not just defensively. I know a lot of the attention will go to the back end, and for sure, I feel like they miss a guy like Ian Cole. As much as the playoffs didn't go very well for him, I think we all
Yeah.
suspect he was injured. But the reality is they miss him. Derek Forbert has been good when healthy, but not available for large chunks of the season. So and obviously Vincent Desharnais hasn't been quite what they hoped he would be, but it was a project, so there's still time there. But I think the forwards too. Like I think some of the forwards they brought in, they expected a certain level of defensive DNA to be baked in, and it wasn't. And so you combine that with a coaching staff that focused on trying to create more off the rush in the training camp. And I think you lost some of those defensive details. And in the past couple of weeks, they've gotten back to them. And I know it's not sexy. Like, it's not
Yeah.
fun. This is not the Bruce Boudreau Canucks. But I would argue, and the numbers would back it up, that you have a better chance of winning when the games really matter in the playoffs if you're playing that way, and that the more they can get the entire group closer to that style of hockey, there's enough finishing touch on the other end to at least have a chance. Colorado, as impressive as they are, is one of the best defensive teams in hockey. Winnipeg is one of the best defensive teams in hockey right now. Edmonton, I think, overlooked for the fact that after the coaching change last year, became one of the best defensive teams in hockey. Like Florida, this is how you win Stanley Cups. And so I'm not saying the Canucks are there. I'm not saying it's fun to watch on a nightly basis, but I think their chances of winning improve if they can get the entire group to buy into this and then rely on the minutes where Quinn Hughes is out there with their elite talent to hopefully, turn the ice enough that they generate just enough offense to get by. Could they use a puck mover in the bottom four on defense? Absolutely. I think a lot of people pointed to that as a concern going into the season, and it's certainly manifested itself that way and is still an issue they need to address, but one that's easier said than done.
Yeah. I mean, even on that, like they just put Erik Brannstrom on waivers. And I know this is a bit of a contentious topic, but it's hard to understand, like, where's the disconnect there? Because this guy to me is a puck moving defenseman. And he, with Quinn Hughes out of the lineup, he still couldn't get, any consistent minutes. Like, what are your thoughts there?
Well, I think toward the end of his tenure, the only place the puck was moving was around his zone in the defensive end with the other team controlling it, right? Like at the end of the day, if that's your identity, that defensive game we talked about, then you have to be able to play to that identity. And Brannstrom certainly adds puck moving that they don't have without him, without a doubt. But if you can't take care of the first part, as your primary focus, then I'm not sure you're going to get to play much under Rick Tocchet. And I think we sort of saw that come to fruition here. Mm-hmm. Do I agree or disagree with it? Like, listen, Bruce Boudreau hockey was fun, right? Like, it was fun. It was entertaining. Yep. But even if they'd gotten in the 1 year where they sort of made that push, I don't think anything was happening once they got there. Like, again, just the numbers, sort of the underlying profile was not one that painted a picture of potential playoff success. And so if there's some other guys on this team that don't play, some forwards that aren't playing that way. Mm-hmm. That, Daniel Sprong was the easy first out, but there's some other guys here that were higher profile signings that don't play that way. And some of them make up for it with just enough offense that you have to live with it. And others, I'm not so sure. If they don't get harder on the walls, on pucks through the middle of the ice, whether they're long-term for here either. So it'd be interesting to sort of see that they're not all the ones that get talked about in all the poster children for, the whipping boys, the Niels Höglanders of the world. There are other guys here who aren't playing to that identity on a consistent basis. And you're trying to get everybody to pull on the rope in the same direction. And Bransom's just an easy target for a guy that didn't give you that, despite everything else he did give you. So I hear the arguments. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just telling you, this is where I think the coaching staff is coming from when they make these decisions.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense there. One of the things I worry about is just, I think the Canucks showed last year in the playoffs that, like, they did play this low event style. Obviously that Nashville series and the lowest shot total of any team to ever, advance in a round. Like, I don't think it's a consistent way to win in the playoffs. So where do they, obviously they got to get that defensive structure and all on the same page there, but how does that activate the offense? Like, what do they need to do? Because running everything through Quinn Hughes, like, that becomes predictable at times, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, like, what are you going to do? You're going to open it up against the Edmonton Oilers? Like,
yeah. Probably a bad idea. Yeah.
Like, look at the rosters. You lose that one every time, right? Like, we've seen this team try and play fire wagon hockey. And again, it was exciting and they surprised some teams and they won some games and they had dramatic third periods. The other thing too is, like, low event, like right now they're not generating anything. Like, so that argument, yes, the people that are screaming it from the rooftops, they win that argument every time, and rightfully so over the past couple of weeks. But up until sort of the injuries to Hughes and Pettersson, the underlying numbers that I have weren't as bad as everyone else's. Like, I know the public stuff paints them as like one of the lowest event teams in the league, like no high danger. But like, if you get a point shot through a layered screen and hit the top corner on either side of the net, it goes in 40% of the time in this league. And when you obviously, it takes a great defenseman to be able to do that, but Quinn Hughes, they have that. And so not all point shots are bad shots. This is a team that has won the net front battle. And so is it, you look at the comeback in Nashville against, when Boeser scores the goals late, like where are all those goals? Like,
yeah,
you can have a certain amount of success, and maybe it is limited. Maybe it will never be enough if this is all you have, but you can have a certain amount of success by winning the net front battles, by creating net front offense, by funneling pucks to those areas. The other thing is, from the dots down, their offensive generation has been fine up until the last couple of weeks. East-west in the offensive zone, like they're doing nothing off the rush. Absolutely, 100%. That's correct, and I think that's where the puck moving comes in. But when they get it sort of in the offensive zone and move it around, like their east-west play, again, up until sort of a couple weeks before Christmas, or I guess around Christmas, where the sort of bottom fell out with Hughes and Pettersson both getting injured, it was flirting with top 10 in the league. Like, so east-west offense is what you want to create. You'd ideally love to do it with odd man rushes, but they're one of the lowest odd man rush teams in the league. Like, that's just not there. And I don't think they have the personnel for it, at least on the back end, to create it. I do think they can turn over more pucks in the neutral zone, but that's defensive. And then you can create off that, but that hasn't been there. I do think they can forecheck more aggressively, but it's a tough way to play for 82 games a year. And we've seen it come and go. And when it goes, what happens? You miss your assignments on the forecheck, the puck gets out cleanly, teams go the other way and score off the rush and through odd man rush chances. So it's not perfect. The way they want them to play is very difficult and difficult to sustain over an 82-game season. But I think too many people might get caught up in how limited that attack is, because when it was going last year, and for times this season, it was just fine. Like, not top of the league, but it was just fine. Like, they were scoring at a clip that matched what they were generating. They didn't have a crazy shooting percentage, and they were still flirting with, top half of the league. I think flirting with top 10 at one point, sort of through early December, just remembering some of the conversations, looking up some of the numbers at that time. And that's where they should have been based on the numbers I have from Clearsight Analytics. This wasn't some fluke. They were generating enough to sort of be in that category. And I think more importantly, the defensive play that wasn't there before has come back. So if you're a top 3 defensive team, which is what they were last year, and you can get back to that offensive, like that's enough. And maybe some would say that's too limited, and it's Rick Tocchet, and it's not aggressive enough and not assertive enough. But if adding the assertiveness comes at the expense of trading chances, we've seen that movie. They don't have have the horses. They don't have the depth. They don't have the defenders. Right. Defend in zone and they're fine. Defend off the rush, especially with Carson Soucy turning into a pumpkin a little bit, and I'm guessing he's hurt right now. They just don't have that.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. I always appreciate having you on here. You're talking me off the ledge here. In just Canadian markets in general, I think it's so extreme, right? We see the numbers here, like you said, the public numbers, and we're like, what the hell's going on? Like, what are these guys doing? Like, my mom, whenever she watches hockey games, she says, they got to shoot the puck more. I'm like, yeah, Mom, they have to shoot the puck, but there's a lot involved here. But sometimes they do have to shoot the damn puck. What the hell? But anyways, that's really good stuff. I do want to get your thoughts, Kevin, on the Demko Lankinen situation. But before I do that, I did want to give you your flowers for identifying Lankinen as a player to target for the Canucks, first off, and also just a guy that can really make a difference when given the opportunity. Obviously, he's done everything asked of him and more for the Canucks. And I wanted to see, why do you think Lankinen has been able to find this level of success with the Canucks?
Well, I mean, frankly, the Canucks were probably lucky he was still there, because if anybody had been listening on July 1st, somebody else would have signed him. Now, the reality is he was asking for $2 million a year, which is what he was making in Nashville. And the underlying numbers said that this was always there, at least for the last 2 seasons. We've seen success early when he started in Chicago. We've seen it at the World Championships. And then the numbers in Nashville, like on a per shot basis, adjusted for the shot quality, were, last year better than UC Saros. We're 12th in the National Hockey League adjusted save percentage. Like, there's a goalie there, and the numbers painted a pretty clear picture. And so whether teams Whether that's worth $2 million a year, I guess some teams decided no, because he wasn't playing a ton in Nashville. I'm guessing that's the reason they couldn't see how good he was. I would argue that all those teams that balked at signing him for $2 million a year would now happily lock him up for multiple years at $2 million a year. And so that kind of goes to my point. If you can get ahead of these curves and have these numbers and see these trends coming and say, as I did since July 1st, that, yeah, Stolar's got 2.5 over 2 years. Brossoit got 2.5 over 2 years, and everybody else got $1 million. To me, he was a guy that was worth more, had more value than everybody else. He was in the Stolar's Brossoit category of upside. And so because he was asking for 2, he doesn't get a contract. He's sitting around. The Canucks get him for dirt cheap, and now they want to re-sign him at a number that it's ironic, because, Rutherford's even said, like, he overplayed his hand in free agency, and that's why he was available to us. Well, okay, he overplayed his hand. You'd probably take him at $2 million for the next 3 years right now, wouldn't you? Because it's going to cost you more than that to re-sign him. He's legit. Now, he's a legit sort of 1B guy. Like, is he number 1 elite starting? Like, as good as this season has gone, and his numbers are actually on a per shot basis a little below where they were last year in Nashville. They've slipped a little bit. But over the course of the last 3 years combined, like, he gives you a really solid number above expected in that category where you say, like, is he an elite number 1? Not necessarily. But he's had stretches where he's played at that level. Overall, he probably is a really nice tandem 1B who gives you 1A upside for stretches. I think we've seen when they've overplayed him that's when the performances have dipped. And that's a pretty nice thing to have. It's a pretty nice thing to be. It makes, it puts you in the top 40 of the entire world of goaltenders. So how they handle it, I mean, lots of words, lots of reports that they're already trying to extend him, that they would like to extend him. Be curious to see what that number looks like. To me, the conversation starts at the Stolar's level, or the Brossoit level. And I'll be, to me, I don't know how much higher you go than that. I don't know how much higher anybody does. It's just the way goaltending gets valued, and I would argue undervalued at times.
Yep.
And whether they want to do that, because if it's going to take term, then it's not just, okay, you've got Lankin, and let's say it's 2.5. And maybe, I'm sure his agent would tell you I'm underselling that. Let's say it's 2.5. Next year's fine. You've got 2 goalies at 7.5. But if you're going to re-sign Demko, we know what that number is. That's 8.25. And I know a lot of people say, well, you can't, like the health issue, you can't sign him to a long-term 8.25 extension if you can't trust him to play a whole bunch. Jeremy Swayman never played more than 40 some odd games for Boston. He got the 8.25 mark. Linus Ullmark was the other part of that tandem. He got the 8.25 mark. Maybe that provides caution because Swayman struggled this year and Ullmark has struggled to stay healthy this year. But I just think that's the new, you've got a second tier at 5. It's where you're Joey Decords and I think Blackwood as a bargain at that. But that top tier is 8.25, and Thatcher Demko's in that top tier. That's his upside is Vezina Trophy winning goaltender. I think he wins it if he doesn't get hurt last year. So, but that if he doesn't get hurt is a big part of the equation. So, it's interesting because if you do sign him at 8.25, now you're 10.5 in your goaltending. And depending on what the cap does, this is not an organization that's wanted to invest that heavily in it.
Yeah. And then depending on what they do, with the Pettersson Miller situation as well. What are your quick thoughts on that? The Pettersson Miller drama that's been going on? Is this something that the Canucks can get past, or do you think there's actually a trade on the horizon?
I have no idea. I hope they can get past it because I think those two at their best are your best chance to win. I don't know that you win any trade with Elias Pettersson involved. He's going to be the best player unless you're getting multiple assets back the other way that maybe help your back end and don't cause too big of a drop off in terms of what you're losing with him upside wise. The Pettersson Miller relationship has never been a secret. They've both addressed it. They've both talked about it. Is it the reason this team has been off to a slow start? It feels like a stretch to me, and yet there are other people that are around that team in that room or have relationships with the coach that tell me, that it is a part of the problem. You've got Quinn Hughes openly addressing it as something he's had to deal with as a captain, which surprised me. The coach talking about it as something he's had to manage as a coach. I don't know that it's the issue so much as, the way Pettersson's played and what they committed to him. They have a timeline. They have a clock on when they have to make a decision on whether that was the right decision in the first place. Like, this is a group that doesn't double down on mistakes. It tends to move on from them. I don't think Elias Pettersson was a mistake, but given the way things have gone since he signed that contract, it's fair to wonder, does the coaching staff think they can win this with this guy long term? And if not, and if there is a rift and he is a high value asset that you can move before July 1st, it looks like they're at least considering that. So I don't have any inside information on whether a trade will happen or not. I do think the relationship stuff, despite having other people say it is a real issue, is probably being overplayed as part of this. Nobody talked about it last year when he signed the contract, when they were winning, when everything was going well. But of course, at that point, he hadn't, Elias Pettersson also hadn't disappeared in the playoffs completely.
Right.
So, and I know that was a talking point in that room. I know there were guys in that room that looked around at each other and were like, is he even trying? Like, that's how bad it looked at times. And it's not, they're not saying he wasn't, but that's just how it looked. Like, it looked to them the same way it looked to us. Like what's going on here? And so, there's a big part of me, because of the talent involved and because we've seen what he did in the bubble playoff, even if that was a fake playoff, that's like, man, I sure would want to see him in one more playoffs before I make that decision. Absolutely. And yet, if they go the same as last time, good luck moving that after that.
Yeah, that's a big contract, but I mean, I like the age, and obviously we've seen proof of concept in what he's done historically. So yeah, I agree with you. I think I would hate to see them move either player, like Miller especially. It's like we saw what that guy did in the playoffs. Like, he doesn't disappear in the playoffs. That guy's a gamer and he's good to go. So yeah, hopefully that's sort of the way it moves forward. They can get through this situation. Before we move off the Canucks here, what are your thoughts on the actual rotation moving forward? So Demko, Lankinen, I mean, for fantasy, that's a really big piece, because Lankinen is a goalie that, I own in a lot of spots, and he's done very well for me. But I think a lot of fantasy managers are wondering, like, is this a guy we got to get off of now? Like, is Demko going to get a bunch of run moving forward?
Actually, I mean, I'm curious to see what decision they make tonight. I haven't seen it as we record this. They were set up for a rotation when he came back, and until Demko got hurt again with the back injury, it looks like that's the way they were going to roll. If they start Lankinen in Winnipeg tonight, then I think the rotation is absolutely, probably until late in the season, the worst it's going to get, unless he gets unless Demko gets on an absolute heater. I think the rotation is probably the way to go.
Right. Kind of like that Washington situation.
But if you're going to come off that rotation this quickly, based on a shutout where the Leafs generated 20 shots and only 3 were high danger, I think that tells you all you need to know about where this team is in terms of desperation to win and a willingness to abandon a plan they may have had in goal to pursue that and to go with the hot hand. And that bodes well for Lankinen buyers. I guess if your downside, at least until March, is a rotation, so that's a couple months of a pure rotation behind a team that's finally getting healthy and might start putting up some results, then that would be the question I'd be asking if I was a Lankinen owner. Like, can I live with an every second start for my guy? And if the answer is yes, then you keep him. Because I think right now, that's kind of, even if Demko gets on a roll, I do think there's a caution in terms of not overplaying him because of the history and the fact that Lankinen's been so good. So unless the bottom falls out of Lankinen, and here's the thing, Lankinen playing less is when you get his best. So I don't see the bottom falling out. As a matter of fact, the way they're defending right now, his numbers should get even better, other than actual saves made, because there's not as many shots. If you can live with a tandem, then I would keep him. I do think late March, and I don't know how this works for different leagues, but if you're into playoff type mode, that could be the spot where they look to ramp Demko up and play him more if he's on form by that point.
Yeah.
Even if Lankinen's playing well, because at the end of the day, as much as I've been a Lankinen backer, and I believe he's a really good goalie who's had really good underlying numbers for a while, Demko's underlying numbers, if they're both at their absolute best, Demko has had a higher ceiling statistically. And so if we get into March and they want to run him 2 out of every 3, you might be looking at more of that type of rotation than in every game back and forth.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And even that right there is, it's a little bit different than what we've seen with Demko in the past. Like he was one of the last true workhorses. And now obviously with, the injuries that he's dealt with, like, I think, yeah, that makes sense. At its worst, it's probably Demko 2, Lankinen 1, and they kind of rotate like that moving into the playoffs. So yeah, no, I like that and appreciate that. I want to move on to talk about another goalie that you called years ago. And I've heard you say you talked about Lankinen a year ago. You actually talked about him 2 years ago. I remember on a pod that I had you on, you were talking up Lankinen as a goalie of interest. And then just last year, you talked about Mackenzie Blackwood. And that was while he was with the San Jose Sharks. And I wanted to know, what was it that you identified in Blackwood that allowed you to correctly call him as a stud goalie in the right environment?
Well, I mean, he's a physical beast, right? Like he's built like a linebacker is an analogy actually some of his goaltending teammates have made to me in years past. He's just such a big body. He's so powerful. And so it was just a matter of sort of knowing when to use that power and when to sort of rein it in. And that can take a little bit of time. I do think in New Jersey, it wasn't even so much about the environment. By the end there, he was playing through some injuries that, frankly, one of them I highlighted bordered on absurd, where they literally cut the back of his skate out and covered it up with black tape so nobody could see it because of what they call a Bauer bump that was so bad it required surgery. So he's always a guy that's had the tools. And the more time he's had in the league, the more he's going to put those together with reads. I do think the work they did in San Jose, Thomas Spear, the goaltending coach there, sort of reined some of that stuff in. He goes to Colorado in a great spot, and he walks into a top 3 defensive environment in the league. Like, that's every goalie's dream. I had a piece on NHL.com recently talking about, why some teams, some goalies will adjust quicker. I do think it was smart of Colorado to get him now rather than wait to the trade deadline, because the trade deadline gives you such a small runway to get comfortable. And now he can sort of acclimatize. And he talked about one of the toughest adjustments is fewer shots. So now you're not as active physically, and your mind can get away from you. So how you rein that in. But I just think the physical tools have always been there, and he's just so big. And behind the Avs, as long as you can move that big frame around to where the shot's coming from, and I think they are a more predictable defensive environment, you're going to have a chance to make a lot of saves. And Mackenzie Blackwood is not limited to just getting in the way. He's got a lot of talent on top of the size. But if that's your baseline, is a good technical foundation that puts you in the space as well as they defend, that's going to give you a really high floor. And then the other stuff he does when he's on just makes the ceiling, to the point where, he's making up some serious ground in the Vezina race in terms of goals saved above expected. He's about 8 or 9 back of Hellebuck now, but those are starting to pile up behind this Avs team.
Yeah, and he doesn't have any competition really taking starts. So I'm wondering, is he going to become a bit of a workhorse now that he's in the Avalanche there?
Hey, Wedgwood's been really good since he got there too. I know he's out right now with an injury. Should be back soon if he's not already. But I know he's out right now. But I would be a little wary of, man. The reality is, quote unquote workhorse. Like, what's a workhorse anymore? I mean, it's Connor Hellebuck, UC Saros, kind of everyone else. The Canucks played Demko to 65 start pace coming into the All-Star game last year, and he didn't make it to the end of the season. So you need to be careful with that, because injuries are a part of Mackenzie Blackwood's history. And because he is such a massive dude, that is a lot of pressure you're putting on the joints every time you drop into a butterfly. So I would be wary of playing him too much, especially if I'm the Avalanche, and I literally played the wheels off Alexander Georgiev the year before.
Yep. Yeah. Tough times for Georgiev over in San Jose there. I hated to kind of see him go out that way, because that's a goalie that I rostered and I liked and I wanted the best for, and he had some good times there in Colorado. But
he's in tougher environment, and obviously it didn't work out in Colorado. To me, there's something happened there that's like, it's sort of hard to explain, because I covered their playoff the year they were in Seattle, and he certainly wasn't the reason they lost. I thought he gave them a nice foundation, but just bad goals started going in. He looked like he was playing tense. He looked like at times he was trying too hard. That snowball got going downhill for him in Colorado. I like him as a goaltender still. I think Thomas Spear in San Jose can maybe get him to relax and loosen up a little bit, not play as rigid and as stiff. And I still think there's a goalie there, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Sharks, as they have with other goalies, turn him into an asset.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. I want to respect your time here, Kevin. I've got a couple goalie questions here. Utah Hockey Club. I want to get your take on Karel Vejmelka and Connor Ingram. They've obviously been a nice surprise there this season. And, while the results aren't necessarily there on the ice in terms of wins and losses, the goaltending for that team has been an absolute strength. And, I was checking on just some goalie prep for the pod here, and I was surprised to see that Vejmelka has the second best goal saved above expected after Hellebuck there. Can you talk a little bit about Vejmelka and, with Ingram back in the fold, sort of what you think their rotation might look like?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see on the rotation. Vejmelka is he's making a case as a Vezina Trophy guy. If the team won more for him, I think he'd be in this conversation. Clearsight Analytics doesn't have him second. They've got him fifth. But just, right there with Philip Gustafson, Logan Thompson, and Igor Shesterkin and Hellebuck, obviously at the top of the list. He's been incredible for them, and really odd because he was so good 2 years ago and then so average last year. So a nice bounce back for Vejmelka. It's early, but it's funny that two of the top five guys are Gustafson and Vejmelka, and they've literally been season off, season on guys. Like one season great, next season next season great. Like reminds me of Craig Anderson in Ottawa. For like 1 year he'd be like not bad, but he'd be like, 915, and then the next year he'd be like 940. Like it would just alternate it back and forth. So I don't know what my theory is on that. I'm going to have to figure that one out, but interesting to look at. Interestingly enough, Jackson Stauber, who came up and didn't play much, but got some starts when Ingram was out, he posted some adjusted save percentage numbers that were right there with Vejmelka. Now, much easier games. They seem to be measured in where they put him into net, a really high expected. So an easier environment for him by 12 full points compared to what Vejmelka was at.
Yep.
But he held the water for them. I'm a big Connor Ingram guy, and I believe that he will rediscover, what he had, what he is. I do think that, I know he's talked about it recently, the circumstances that he went through in terms of his mom being ill and losing his mom. I think we just can't measure that. Like the effect that has on a person when they're trying to, it's trying to play a position that is so largely mental. If your mind isn't there. So his numbers, they've really fallen off this year. But I think now that we have an idea what the circumstances were behind it, I think you can understand it. And so I would expect him, if he can, come back and be comfortable, to look more like the guy that we saw last year. Like I believe he's a good goaltender. Like at the end of the day, this is Vejmelka's crease and he's earned it.
Yep.
But hopefully Ingram can come back and sort of, it's not easy being the backup because he was playing more last year, and that's a little easier, and that's something he's adjusted to in the past. But hopefully he can come back and sort of find comfort level in that role and just sort of clear his head and as much as is humanly possible under those circumstances, and start to look more like the guy that he has for the past couple of seasons for Arizona and Utah.
There's so many good tandems out there these days. Like, Anaheim is another one with Dostal and Gibson is a team that, I didn't have on my bingo card, especially Dostal having kind of the season he's having there. Do you think the things like Karel Vejmelka and Utah's defensive environment and even Anaheim's defensive environment for Dostal and Gibson, are these sustainable, or are these like, as you've described, goalies that are basically catching bullets in their teeth, until the wheels fall off?
Vejmelka, I mean, Vejmelka and Gibson are both below league average, but not significantly. So like this, this isn't Eric Comrie in Buffalo last year with one of the worst environments I've ever seen. This isn't the Philadelphia Flyers. Like what they're doing to their goaltenders in terms of expected environments is, borders on criminal, to be honest with you. It's it's unreal, man. Like Alexei Kolosov has an expected of 861. Samuel Ersson has an expected of 865. Fedotov has an expected of 874. Like that's the highest one. He's 12 points below league average. Like 861 and 865 for two of your goaltenders who have played as many minutes as they have is like, that's some scary stuff.
That's ugly.
And so Utah's not in that category. Yeah, and even Anaheim, as much as they're a team that's easy to overlook, they're not in that category either. John Gibson has been exceptional this year. His numbers are, when I filter it for guys that have played at least, seen at least a couple hundred shots so far this year. So that make that the baseline. And we're talking about a guy who is in the top 10 in the National Hockey League in adjusted save percentage. He's been that good. Dostal obviously had the incredible start. He's still in the top 20. These are, the Gibson one is really interesting. I want to see him on a good team. I'm curious to see what happens there. There's one statistic weakness in his profile: low slot line plays across the middle of the ice below the hash marks. Continue, even as well as he's playing now, continue to be something that stands out. But if you're a team that doesn't give those up, man, I'd be making an investment in this guy, because it's pretty clear he can still play, and he's doing it. He's doing it at a level right now that it might surprise some people. On a per shot basis, he's better than Jacob Markstrom this year. He's still ahead of Mackenzie Blackwood, although Blackwood's closing that gap. UC Saros, Aiden Hill, Joseph Woll, Linus Ullmark, even after the heater he got on, Ilya Sorokin, Andre Vasilevsky. Like, those are names that are behind John Gibson right now on the adjusted save percentage list. So I know there's 2 years left on a contract that's not cheap, but with goalie price going up, to 8.25 becoming the new standard after being at 5 for so long, maybe somebody's finally willing to take a chance. And I hope it's a good team, because I really want to see what he'd be like on one.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have that cost certainty for sure. Even on that point there, Kevin, are there any goalies, like, other than Gibson, that you can see that maybe would benefit from a change in scenery, like a la Mackenzie Blackwood, moving to another team there? Like, with the trade deadline coming up, do you think there's any goalies that you're sort of seeing might potentially be moved and could sort of take off here the back half of the season?
Well, I mean, the potential UFA list, right? Like Logan Thompson and Charlie Lindgren are both potential UFAs, but actually, is Thompson an RFA or a UFA? I'd have to look that up. But I mean, those guys are, Lindgren's out right now, but he's been climbing the charts after a slower than usual start. And Logan Thompson's at the top of the entire National Hockey League, could be a Vezina finalist this year. So those are the guys that jump out from a contract status and performance profile. But Washington, given where they are, I don't see them moving on from those guys. The guys near the top of the list this year are all guys that are under contract sort of longer term. Samsonov and Aiden Hill. I don't think they're moving on from anyone.
Right.
You have to go pretty far down the list outside of the two Washington guys to find someone. Well, I guess Lankinen, but they're trying to re-sign him. And I don't think, given Demko's history, that there's any chance they don't keep him for a playoff run. So otherwise, Lankinen would be near the top of that list. But other than the Washington guys, Marc-Andre Fleury is retiring. Joey Daccord re-upped. There's not a ton of guys here that are in the top 30 of the league that are free agent options.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. We've already had like some decent goalie movement here already. So, that might be kind of it for the big moves anyway. But I do that.
And that took a UFA off the market, right? Like when Colorado, and I know a lot of people like, oh, it's a mistake to re-up him this early. But if you believe in the guy and you know how good you are defensively, then you have a hunch what kind of number he's going to post behind your team. And that price actually for Blackwood, as much as people scream that this was a mistake and why did they do it so early, like he keeps playing like this and ends up a Vezina candidate, that price tag was only going to go up. I think, you could reflect on that one in a few years, and a deal that everybody was screaming was a bad one could end up looking like one of the best bargains in the National Hockey League.
Yeah. I mean, I liked it at the time. And then now, after the fact, you look at his numbers, even just the goals against that he's allowing on a regular basis. It's insane. And like you said, that environment there is crazy. All right. Kevin, I got one more question for you. This is fantasy related. So I'm going to put you on the spot here, but I want to do a little bit of rapid fire here with you. I'm going to throw some goalies at you, and I want you to give me your best take on who's going to get more wins rest of season. Okay, just wins. That's all. These are goalies that are probably available on our waiver wires here for fantasy. So, and I try to make them comparable. So, are you ready to go, Kevin?
Yep, ready to go.
Okay, Tristan Jarry or Elvis Merzlikins?
Oh man, like you pulled out the hard ones right off the bat.
Sorry, they're all. These are the type of decisions that fantasy managers are making because these guys are on the wire, right? And one of the things that I've talked to you about before is sort of we do a 0G draft strategy here where you're basically cycling goalies through off the waiver wire, and these are guys that are out there.
They're both performing at similar levels. I think the belief in Alex Nedeljkovic might get him more starts alongside Tristan Jarry. So in other words, Jarry might start less than Merzlikins, although my goodness has sort of friend of the program, so to speak, here at In Goal. Jet Greaves looked really good.
He did.
Yeah, he's his adjusted save percentage is tops in the National Hockey League among all goalies to see 100 shots. So whether they let him run with that and whether that eats into Merzlikins' minutes, Elvis has had really good moments this year and really good performances. I'm going to go with Elvis over Jarry on this one. And that's team-based too. That's not me picking a goalie.
Yeah, I try to keep it like, so you're not having to pick favorites. It's more just wins, and we're looking at team environments here as well. So I like that too. I mean, Merzlikins won 4 of 5. And I like what Dean Evison has done there in Columbus. I think it's obviously been a net positive for the team. It's been a surprising team, actually. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one here. Kevin Lankinen or Charlie Lindgren?
Ooh, Lindgren being out with what sounds like a concussion right now makes me a little hesitant. Lankinen's getting the start in Winnipeg tonight, which is an eyebrow raiser. They've gone away from the rotation. That doesn't surprise me from a coaching decision, but surprises me from that tandem back and forth decision. I think I'd go Lankinen. Like I said, I think at the worst he ends up in a tandem here. And right now Charlie's upside is a tandem and he's hurt. So as good as Thompson has been, I think the Canucks are healthy and they're going to start winning some games. So give me Lankinen over Lindgren.
I love it. All right. Next one up here, Sam Montembeault of Montreal or Dustin Wolf?
I'm taking Dustin Wolf. I know Montreal's on a heater, and this is not a Sam. So that's a team thing versus listen, I'm taking Dustin Wolf because he is 8th in the National Hockey League in adjusted save percentage right now. Like he is right there neck and neck with Igor Shesterkin and Connor Hellebuck on a per shot basis. That's how good this kid has been. I know the wins may be harder to come by and there may be fewer of them down the stretch here for Calgary than there is for a Montreal team that seems to have figured things out. But I can't ignore a guy who, is on the outskirts of the Vezina conversation in Dustin Wolf.
Yeah, I love that. Obviously a player of interest going into the season here. I love the story of Dustin Wolf. Like obviously with his size, that he's kind of like an underdog, and I really appreciate that about the player. So anyways, yeah, shout out to Dustin Wolf. Last one here. These are goalies that obviously higher end goalies that are struggling a little bit. Ilya Sorokin or UC Saros?
That's a tough one. To me, pick the team you think most likely to win some games. Saros has kind of come down to earth here in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And it's funny because I wish I'd put something out on social media beforehand. First couple months of the season, they absolutely wasted what was a brilliant performance. Like he's still top 20 in the league in adjusted save percentage, but he was like top 5 for the longest time. Like he was in that conversation as one of the best goalies in the league, and they absolutely wasted it. It's a hard way to play when you have no margin for error because your team doesn't score. But I would. And the defensive environment has loosened significantly there. He's below expected, below the league average when it comes to expected save percentage. But I would lean UC Saros there. If you're going the other way, it's just you believe the other team is that much better.
I love it. You heard it here first, folks. That's Kevin Woodley, aka the Goalie Whisperer. Kevin, thank you so much for your time. Before I let you go, I always like to get you just to tell us a little bit about In Goal Magazine and sort of the good work you're doing over there, just for our listeners.
I mean, basically, I'm an idiot, but people in the NHL are kind enough to share things with me, so I learn a lot about goaltending through that, and most of what they share with me ends up at ingoalmag.com. including sitting down with NHL goaltenders and going over saves, watching video with them and having them explain why they choose certain save selections, why they choose certain depths in certain moments. In other words, helping goalies, whether you're in the beer leagues or you've got a young goalie or you're a parent or a goalie coach, helping goalies at every level process the game better, read the game better. It's something that's really missing with a lot of young goalies. Spend a lot of times in goalie schools, skating from point A to point B to point C and knowing exactly where the shot is coming from and where it's going. The ability to read the game. We hear a lot about goalies that look great on the ice in practice or in goalie school sessions, and they just can't play the game. That's one of the many things we do. We've got goalie drills, tips, insights, gear, interviews with some of the best in the world. There is literally over 1,000 stories at ingoalmag.com, over 300 videos of NHL goalies breaking down film, and you get it all for $50 Canadian a year, which if you're American and listening to this is like what, $20, 2 cups of
$5,
coffee?
$7. I don't know, whatever.
I think it's actually $250 a month in the States for this. And there is content loaded up every week on it. As NHL goalie coaches have told us, it is the best way to become a better goaltender.
It's an unbelievable bargain and a great service that you're providing for the community. Kevin, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate that. And hope to have you on again real soon.
Perfect. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, man. And thanks so much for listening, everybody. We'll talk to you again next time. Celebrate your day. Bye for now.